The world worshipped a blonde goddess. The Chicago mob weaponized a terrified hostage. Marilyn Monroe slept with the President of the United States, but she was owned by Mafia boss Sam Giancana. The public cried for a fragile star who swallowed too many pills, while the autopsy room hid a brutal state-sanctioned execution. When America's ultimate honey trap allegedly threatened to expose a dirty alliance between the White House and the underworld, the darkest theories suggest the government and the Mafia agreed on one thing: the Golden Girl had to die. If this shadow narrative is true, this wasn't a tragic Hollywood suicide. It was a flawless political assassination. Stripping away the myth reveals the true machinery of her destruction. Beneath the golden idol was a girl born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926. An orphan with a mother locked in an asylum. She grew up searching for a father in every man she met. Hollywood recognized that hunger. The studios fed on it. The studios manufactured her from scratch, bleaching her hair, changing her name, and handing her a script to build a golden idol. But idols are hollow. Marilyn Monroe was a brilliant creation, a second skin worn by a terrified woman who desperately wanted to be loved. She thought fame would provide a shield. She was wrong. Fame simply made her an expensive target. Sam Giancana had no interest in Hollywood glamour or vulnerable orphans. As the supreme boss of the Chicago outfit, his only currencies were power and leverage. He looked at the most desired woman on earth and saw a tactical asset, the ultimate honey trap. The year was 1960, and the United States was locked in a brutal, razor-thin presidential election. To win the White House, John F. Kennedy absolutely needed the state of Illinois, specifically Chicago. His father, Joe Kennedy, understood the grim reality of Chicago politics. The unions controlled the democracy, and the mob controlled the unions. Following a deal struck in smoke-filled backrooms, Giancana delivered the votes, famously having the dead rise from their graves to pull levers for Kennedy. With the election secured, the mob had effectively bought the presidency, fully expecting absolute immunity as a return on their investment. They received a declaration of war instead. As soon as John F. Kennedy took the oath of office, he appointed his brother, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General. Almost immediately, Bobby Kennedy launched the most aggressive crusade against organized crime in American history, directly targeting the very men, including Sam Giancana, who had put his brother in power. Furious at this absolute betrayal and the breaking of unwritten rules, the mob boss desperately needed a weapon to force the administration to back down, blackmail material explosive enough to annihilate the Kennedy dynasty. He needed Marilyn Monroe. She was the perfect conduit. She was already circling the orbiter of the political elite. She was beautiful, she was famous, and she was fragile. The Kennedy brothers were drawn to her. They shared her company, they shared her bed. Marilyn thought she had finally found the ultimate protectors. She thought she was part of Camelot. She believed the whispers in the dark. She believed the promises made between tangled sheets. Watching this unfold with cold, predatory patience, Giancana knew the Kennedys were arrogant and reckless enough to talk. He just needed someone to listen. The mob began to close the net around her. It was not done with threats. It was done with invitations. Giancana operated through proxies. He used the glittering, untouchable world of Frank Sinatra and his elite circle to draw her in. Sinatra was the bridge between Hollywood and the underworld. His parties were legendary. They were awash in champagne, beautiful people, and dangerous men. Marilyn was invited. She attended. She felt safe among other stars. She did not realize she was walking into an interrogation room disguised as a luxury resort. Studying her fragile psychology, Giancana knew all about her crippling insomnia, the severe stage fright that made her vomit before a scene, and her heavy reliance on Nembutal to sleep and amphetamines to wake up. Fully recognizing that she was a chemical tightrope walker, the mob ruthlessly exploited this dependence. They ensured she always had a steady supply of whatever she needed. They became her pharmacists. They became her confidants. They blurred the lines of reality for her. They made her feel understood, isolated her from her true friends, and replaced them with handlers. The trap was set. She was positioned directly between the two most powerful, ruthless forces in the country. On one side, the President of the United States and his crusading brother. On the other side, a syndicate of killers who controlled the American underworld. She was the rope in a deadly tug-of-war. Marilyn Monroe was treated as a disposable object by everyone involved. The politicians used her for pleasure. The mob used her for leverage. Everyone wildly underestimated her, blinded by the platinum hair and breathy voice, assuming she was just a naive starlet. They entirely failed to realize the dumb blonde persona was a meticulously crafted act, hiding an avid reader with a razor-sharp, highly observant mind. Lying in the dark with the most powerful men in Washington, she simply listened. Men with power always want to boast and show off how much of the world they hold in their hands, freely whispering secrets in the afterglow. They brazenly discussed the stolen election, dirty money, foreign policy, and Cuba. Absorbing it all, she committed names, dates, and meeting locations to memory. Like a sponge soaking up the toxic runoff of American politics, she mistakenly believed that holding these secrets made her an important insider, confusing shared vulnerability with genuine trust. She began to write things down. She kept a small, red-covered diary as her ultimate insurance policy, tangible proof that the things she heard were real. She documented every conversation and whispered promise, holding onto that book like a life preserver without realizing it was an anchor designed to drag her to the bottom of the ocean. Giancana knew about the diary. His men had eyes inside her house. They listened to her phone calls. The technology of blackmail had evolved. The mob did not just rely on intimidation anymore. They relied on electronics. Wiring her entire world, they bugged both the bedrooms and the telephones to capture the voices of the Kennedy brothers talking to the biggest movie star in the world. Every whispered pillow talk, heated argument, and desperate tear was meticulously recorded. Giancana sat in Chicago listening to the tapes. He smiled. He had the President of the United States exactly where he wanted him. He had the Attorney General by the throat. The crusade against organized crime was about to hit a brick wall. All he had to do was threaten to release the tapes to the press. All he had to do was expose the hypocrisy of the Golden family in the White House. But a complication arose. The weapon became unstable. Marilyn's mental state began to deteriorate rapidly. The pressure of living a triple life was crushing her. She was trying to maintain her career at a studio that treated her like a difficult child. She was trying to maintain a relationship with politicians who treated her like a secret shame. She was surrounded by mobsters who treated her like a piece of meat. The pills stopped working. The alcohol stopped numbing the pain. Becoming wildly unpredictable, she started calling the White House switchboard at all hours of the night, furiously demanding to speak to both the president and Bobby, leaving desperate, erratic messages. She even threatened to show up entirely uninvited. The Kennedys panicked. The risk became too great. The honey trap was turning into a liability. The FBI was closing in. J. Edgar Hoover, a man who despised the Kennedys, was compiling his own files. The political climate was turning hostile. The brothers made a cold, calculated decision. They had to cut her loose. They stopped taking her calls. They changed their private numbers. They sent intermediaries to tell her it was over. The door to Camelot was slammed in her face and locked from the inside. Completely abandoned and devastated, the brutal rejection shattered the fragile remnants of her self-worth. Having given them everything, keeping their darkest secrets and genuinely believing they would protect her, she was now entirely alone, exposed, and vulnerable to the men in the shadows. Giancana saw his opportunity. The Kennedys had discarded her. She was angry, she was hurt, she was dangerous. An angry, discarded woman with a diary full of state secrets is the most destructive force on Earth. Giancana knew he had to act fast. He had to squeeze the last drop of usefulness out of her before she completely broke down. He orchestrated a trip. He used Frank Sinatra to lure her to the Cal Neva Lodge. It was the summer of 1962. It was supposed to be a weekend of rest and relaxation. It was supposed to be a safe haven. It was a prison transfer. The Cal Neva Lodge sat directly on the state line dividing California and Nevada. It was a geographical loophole. It was a place designed for men who operated outside the law. Lake Tahoe stretched out before it, massive and freezing. The water was a deep, impenetrable blue. Marilyn arrived in a private plane. The altitude made her dizzy. The air was thin and smelled of pine needles. She wore a simple scarf and dark sunglasses. She looked like a woman seeking refuge. She was actually walking into a highly sophisticated surveillance grid. While Frank Sinatra owned the lodge on paper, playing the gracious host who poured drinks and entertained guests, Sam Giancana owned it in reality. Operating entirely from the shadows, the mob boss orchestrated every detail. Chalet 50 was prepared specifically for Marilyn. It was isolated from the main casino floor. It offered privacy. That was the lie. The cabin was wired from floor to ceiling. Microphones were embedded in the walls. They were hidden behind the light fixtures. They were tucked inside the rotary telephone. Every sigh, every whisper, every click of a lighter was recorded. The mob did not just want to watch her, they wanted to archive her. Marilyn unpacked her bags. She brought her scripts. She brought her makeup. She brought the small red diary. She placed it on the nightstand. She thought she was among friends. She trusted Sinatra. He had always been kind to her. He had a gentle voice when he wanted to. She did not realize his kindness was a tactic. He was a middleman. He was delivering a package. The first night was a party. The casino floor was loud. The roulette wheels clicked. The smell of expensive cigars filled the air. Marilyn wore a tight dress. She drank champagne. She laughed. She played the part perfectly. The men at the table stared at her. They did not see a human being. They saw a trophy. Giancana watched her from a raised booth. He did not smile. He calculated. He saw the way she leaned on the men around her. He saw the slight tremor in her hands. He knew she was running on fumes. He knew the pills were wearing off. The next morning, the glittering facade dropped. The parties abruptly stopped and the guests vanished, leaving Marilyn completely confined to Chalet 50. With the door locked from the outside and the phone line dead, panic quickly set in. She pounded on the heavy wooden door, but nobody answered. Looking out the window, she saw Lake Tahoe, beautiful, sprawling, and entirely indifferent to her terror. She was a bird in a gilded cage, trapped in a deafening silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Then came the doctor. The doctor, a man strictly on the mob payroll, arrived carrying a black leather bag. Bypassing any questions about her well-being or checking her vitals, he simply produced a syringe, clinically claiming it was a vitamin shot. It was a cocktail of heavy sedatives and amphetamines. It was designed to keep her compliant. It was designed to scramble her brain. He injected her. The needle pierced her skin. She felt a cold rush of chemicals enter her bloodstream. The edges of the room softened. The panic subsided into a dull, heavy fog. She lay back on the bed. She lost track of time. Giancana visited her when she was sedated. He sat in a chair by the bed. He smoked a cigar. The smoke filled the small cabin. He did not touch her. He did not need to. His presence was a physical weight. He started talking. He kept his voice low and even. He told her she had been abandoned. He told her the Kennedys were laughing at her. He told her they called her behind her back. He used the words deliberately. He wanted to hit her deepest insecurities. He knew she was terrified of being discarded. He knew she was terrified of being seen as dirty. Marilyn lay on the sheets. Her limbs felt like lead. She heard the words. They cut through the chemical fog. They hit their mark. Tears rolled down her face. She felt a profound, crushing loneliness. She had given the president her heart. She had sung for him. She had believed his promises. Giancana was telling her the brutal truth. She was a joke to them. She was a liability. Giancana changed his tone. He offered a solution. He told her she could take control. He told her she could punish them. All she had to do was hand over the diary. All she had to do was tell him everything she knew. He promised to protect her. He promised to ruin the men who had ruined her. It was a seductive offer. It was the devil offering a glass of water in the desert. But Marilyn Monroe possessed a feral survival instinct. The studios had tried to break her. The press had tried to break her. Her husbands had tried to break her. She had survived them all. Even through the haze of the sedatives, a warning bell rang in her mind. She looked at Giancana. She saw the dead eyes. She saw the absolute absence of empathy. She realized he did not want to protect her. He wanted to weaponize her. If she gave him the diary, she would serve no further purpose. She would be completely expendable. Using her iconic blonde persona as an impenetrable shield, she lied. Playing dumb and adamantly insisting there was no diary. Widening her eyes and dropping her voice to a breathy whisper, she acted entirely confused. Staring at her coldly, Giancana didn't believe a single word. Knowing she was lying, he simply stood up and walked out. The heavy door locking firmly behind him, the psychological torture escalated. The mob deprived her of sleep. They played loud music outside her cabin. They banged on the walls. When she finally drifted off, the doctor would return with another injection. They wanted to break her grip on reality. They wanted her to question her own memories. They induced a state of constant paranoia. Marilyn began to see shadows moving in the corners of the room. She heard voices in the static of the radio. She tore the cabin apart looking for listening devices. She found the microphones hidden behind the mirrors. She found the wires running under the carpet. Her worst fears were confirmed. She was surrounded by invisible eyes and ears. She crawled into the closet. It was the only place that felt safe. She sat in the dark, clutching her knees to her chest. She held the red diary tight against her body. It was her only connection to the truth. She thought about her mother. Gladys Pearl Baker had spent her life in mental institutions. She was paranoid. She heard voices. Marilyn had always feared she would inherit her mother's madness. The men at the Calneva Lodge were deliberately pushing her toward that exact edge. They wanted to manufacture insanity. If she sounded crazy, nobody would believe her secrets. Her inner world was a war zone. Exhausted and terrified, she simply wanted to surrender, to hand over the diary and make the noise stop. Beneath the glamorous facade, she craved nothing more than the profound peace of a normal life. A chance to sleep, a child to hold, and the quiet safety of a home with a white picket fence. The contrast was agonizing. She was the most famous woman alive, and she was huddled on the floor of a closet hiding from mobsters, reeking of sweat and fear. A desperate clarity washed over her. She realized nobody was coming to save her. The president was not going to send the cavalry. Frank Sinatra was not going to open the door. She had to save herself. She had to escape Lake Tahoe. The opportunity came during a chaotic weekend. The lodge was full. High rollers from Chicago had arrived. The security was stretched thin. Sinatra was distracted. Giancana was holding meetings. The man assigned to guard her door stepped away for a cigarette. Marilyn seized the moment. Leaving her bags behind, she grabbed nothing but her purse and the red diary before slipping out the cabin window. The mountain air hit her like a physical blow. She was incredibly weak, her legs shaking uncontrollably from the chemical haze. The drugs were still coursing through her veins. She ran through the pine trees. She avoided the main paths. She heard the sounds of the casino in the distance, the clinking glasses, the laughter. It sounded like a different planet. She reached the highway. She hitched a ride with a delivery truck. She did not speak. She stared straight ahead. The driver recognized her. He was too stunned to say anything. He drove her to the airport in Reno. She boarded a commercial flight back to Los Angeles. She wore dark glasses and a scarf pulled tight around her head. She slumped in her seat. She looked like a battered refugee. She returned to her home in Brentwood, 12,305 Fifth Helena Drive. It was a modest house. It was the only home she had ever owned. She bought it herself. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was built with thick adobe walls. It felt like a fortress. She secured the gates and drew the curtains. The adobe fortress offered physical safety, but it cemented her absolute isolation. As the adrenaline faded, the silence of the house became oppressive. The withdrawal symptoms began. Her body ached. Her mind raced. The phone rang constantly. She did not answer it. She knew who was calling. The mob wanted their property back. The Kennedys wanted to make sure she was quiet. Marilyn sat on her bed. She opened the red diary. She read the entries, the names, the dates, the betrayals. Reading through the entries of betrayals and empty promises, a profound burning anger washed over her. She realized she had been locked in a cabin and drugged by the very men who claimed to care about her. She was never a partner in their power plays. She was merely a disposable commodity. The anger was pure. It burned away the fog of the sedatives. She made a fierce decision. She would not be a silent victim, nor would she fade quietly into the dark. Refusing to let them write her narrative, she remembered exactly who she was. She was Marilyn Monroe. She had a voice and audience, and she was finally ready to use them. She decided to hold a press conference. It was a lethal calculation. She knew the risks. She knew what Giancana was capable of doing. She knew what the government was capable of doing, but she felt she had no other choice. It was the ultimate preemptive strike. If she told the world everything, the secrets would lose their power. They could not blackmail the president if the public already knew the truth. They could not silence her if she was standing in front of 100 cameras. The truth was her only shield. Bypassing her handlers, she immediately started making phone calls to trusted journalists and industry friends. While she remained cautious, she heavily hinted at a major announcement, stating her intention to finally clear the air and expose the hypocrisy of Washington. Her words were vague, but her intent was unmistakable. Words spread rapidly. The whispers turned into a roar. The news reached the Department of Justice. It reached the White House. It reached the Chicago outfit. Panic erupted in the highest quarters of power. The ultimate nightmare was materializing. The blonde bombshell was going to detonate. The convergence of interests was unprecedented. The Kennedys and the Mafia despised each other. They were locked in a war for the soul of the country, but in the early days of August 1962, they found a common enemy. They found a mutual threat. A single woman with a red notebook had the power to destroy them both. Marilyn Monroe had become a systemic risk. She could not be allowed to reach a microphone. She could not be allowed to speak. The decision was not made in a formal meeting. There were no signed orders. It was an unspoken consensus among powerful men. The problem had to be eliminated. The threat had to be neutralized. The machinery of murder began to turn quietly and efficiently, perfectly designed to look like a tragedy. Instead of bullets or bombs, her assassins would use her own reputation against her, weaponizing her sleeping pills and the deep sadness the public already suspected. Marilyn spent the first few days of August quietly preparing for a new chapter. She bought furniture for the Brentwood house, hired a new publicist, and gave interviews that sounded remarkably upbeat. To the outside world, she was actively reclaiming her life and boldly charting a new course. Her inner thoughts were focused on the future. She wanted to act in serious roles. She wanted to be respected. She was fighting for her dignity. Her external reality was a closing trap. The men outside her gates were watching. The phone lines were still tapped. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, moved quietly through the house. Murray watched Marilyn arrange flowers. Murray watched Marilyn make phone calls. Murray reported every movement to her handlers. The housekeeper was the Trojan horse inside the fortress. She was the key to the front door. The tension in Los Angeles was palpable during that dry, hot summer. As the Santa Ana winds blew through the canyons, Marilyn felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere, a sudden, unsettling silence from her former protectors. The phone stopped ringing and the threats ceased. It was the eerie calm before a massive storm. She spent the evening of August 3rd alone in her bedroom. She looked at the red diary. She knew she was holding a live grenade. She felt a flicker of doubt. Was she strong enough to fight them all? Could she really stand in front of the press and destroy the president? The weight of the impending action was crushing. She reached for the pill bottle on her nightstand. Nembutal. It was her old crutch. She took a small dose, just enough to take the edge off, just enough to quiet the racing thoughts. She needed rest. She needed strength for the days ahead. She lay back on the pillows. She stared at the ceiling. She listened to the wind rattling the window panes. She did not know the killers were already moving into position. She did not know that her decision to speak had signed her death warrant. She closed her eyes. She waited for sleep. She waited for the dawn. The 4th of August 1962 began with blinding lows, Angel's sunshine. The heat was heavy and stagnant over Brentwood. Inside 12,305 Fifth Helena Drive, Marilyn Monroe woke up. She was 36 years old. She had a lingering headache from the sedative she took the night before. She drank a glass of grapefruit juice. She walked around her house. She touched the new furniture she had ordered from Mexico. She was nesting. She was building a future. Her internal world was focused on tomorrow. She planned to host a gathering. She ordered food. She made phone calls. She felt a spark of genuine control. Her external reality was a completely different machine. The house was not a home, it was a fishbowl. Every move she made was monitored. Peter Lawford called her that afternoon. Lawford was a British actor. He was also married to Patricia Kennedy, the sister of the president. He was the errand boy for the Kennedy family. He was the fixer. He called to check her temperature. He invited her to a party that night. He was probing. He wanted to know if she was going to talk. He wanted to know if the press conference was still happening. Marilyn declined the invitation. Her voice was flat. She did not play the breathless blonde. She was tired of the game. Clear's throat. Lawford hung up the phone. The signal was clear. She was not backing down. The liability was fully active. Eunice Murray watched Marilyn put the phone down. Murray was officially the housekeeper. She was unofficially the warden. Clear's throat. She was hired by Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. Greenson was deeply embedded in the network of men who controlled Marilyn's life. He controlled her access to med. Occasion, Murray controlled her physical space. Murray received a quiet paycheck to report every mood swing, every visitor, and every phone call. Murray noticed the red diary on the bedside table. She noticed the defiant set of Marilyn's jaw. The housekeeper went to the kitchen. She picked up the phone. She made a brief call. She spoke in low tones. The final gear in the murder plot clicked into place. Dr. Greenson arrived at the house a few hours later. He spent the entire afternoon with Marilyn. The session was not therapy, it was an interrogation. Greenson tried to talk her out of the press conference. He told her she was delusional. He told her she was ruining her career. He tried to sedate her. He wanted to prescribe a heavy dose of Nembutal to put her to sleep for the weekend. Refusing the medication, Marilyn fought back. Desperate to remain completely lucid, having spent her entire adult life chemically altered by the men who managed her, she fiercely rejected the pills and demanded that Greenson leave. She told him she was firing him, firing everyone, and finally taking her life back. Greenson left the house visibly agitated. He knew he had lost control. He knew what was coming next. He did not call the police. He walked away and left her to the wolves. The sun dipped below the Santa Monica Mountains. The shadows in the house lengthened. Marilyn put on a white bathrobe. She played Frank Sinatra records on her phonograph. It was a cruel irony. The man who had lured her into the Calneva trap was now providing the soundtrack for her final hours. She waited for the night. She felt anxious, but it was the anxiety of anticipation, not despair. She called Joe DiMaggio Jr., the son of her second husband. She sounded cheerful. They talked about his future. It was a normal conversation. It was the last normal conversation she would ever have. For those who believe the official record, Marilyn Monroe simply took too many pills in a moment of solitary despair. But those who subscribe to the shadow narrative reconstruct a far more sinister timeline. According to this theory, around 9:30 in the evening, a dark, unmarked sedan parked near Fifth Helena Drive. Two men, allegedly Sam Giancana's enforcers, stepped out carrying a small leather medical bag. The theory suggests they bypassed the front door's lock while Eunice Murray, acting as a paid accomplice, silently retreated to her room. If this alternate history is true, the men moved with brutal efficiency. Avoiding her face to preserve the suicide narrative, they violently pinned her to the hardwood floor. Conspiracy theorists argue they tore the room apart until they found the red diary, destroying her only insurance policy. The enforcers then crushed the silver-framed photograph of Joe DiMaggio, a stark message that she was completely alone, before forcing her onto the mattress. Because undissolved capsules in the stomach would immediately point to murder during an autopsy, underground investigators theorized the men administered a lethal enema, or a massive untraceable injection of Nembutal and chloral hydrate. As the staggering dose hit her bloodstream, the men allegedly held her down with unyielding force until her chest stopped moving entirely. Only then, the theory goes, did the staging begin. They stripped her naked to fit the myth of the tragic star and wrapped her stiffening fingers around the phone receiver. It was a masterstroke of theatrical manipulation designed to ensure that when the police finally arrived, they would see a classic Hollywood tragedy, not a flawless execution. The men packed their bag. They walked out of the bedroom. They walked down the hallway. They let themselves out the front door. The lock clicked shut behind them. Clear's throat, the dark sedan pulled away from 5th Helena Drive and vanished into the Lowe's Angels night. The clock ticked in the silent house on 5th Helena Drive. Eunice Murray sat in her bedroom and listened to the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene. It was past midnight. The men in the dark suits were gone. A normal person would have rushed down the hallway to check on the woman who employed her. Murray did not move. She did not call an ambulance. She waited exactly as she was instructed to wait. She gave the chemicals time to work. She gave the blood time to settle. She let the body grow cold. The cover-up had officially begun. When she finally stood up, her actions were not those of a panicked housekeeper. They were the actions of a crime scene cleaner. She walked into the master bedroom. Marilyn Monroe lay face down on the mattress. She was entirely motionless. Her hand gripped the severed telephone cord. Murray did not scream. She did not run to the kitchen phone to dial for an ambulance. She approached the bed. She saw the mess. An assault leaves traces. A lethal enema or a massive forced injection leaves physical evidence on the sheets. Murray stripped the bed. She pulled the soiled linens from Beniat. The naked body. She gathered the fabric in her arms. She carried the sheets to the laundry room. She opened the washing machine, threw the evidence inside, poured in the detergent, and turned the dial. The machine began to hum. It was a loud, mechanical churning sound in the middle of a house containing a corpse. Only then did Eunice Murray pick up the telephone. She still did not call the police. She called Dr. Ralph Greenson. Clear's throat. Greenson lived nearby. He arrived at the Brentwood house quickly. He brought another physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg. The two men walked into the house. They found Murray running the washing machine. They walked into the master bedroom. They looked at the greatest movie star in the world lying dead on a bare mattress. They knew exactly what had happened. They knew the players involved. They knew the stakes. They did not immediately contact the authorities. They spent hours in the house. They coordinated their stories. They arranged the scene. They needed a narrative that protected themselves, protected the studio, protected the political elite, and satisfied the mob. They agreed on the story of a locked door. They agreed to say Murray woke up in the middle of the night, saw a light under Marilyn's door, and could not get inside. Greenson went outside and broke a window with a fire poker to gain entry. It was a piece of bad theater. It was a staged break-in to explain a delay that could never be truly justified. At 4:25 in the morning, hours after Marilyn Monroe had taken her last breath, the Lowe's Angels Police Department finally received a phone call. Sergeant Jack Clements was the watch commander on duty. He took the call. A voice on the other end identified himself as Dr. Greenson. The voice stated that Marilyn Monroe was dead. Clements dispatched a patrol car and drove to the house himself. He was a veteran cop. He had seen hundreds of crime scenes. He knew how human beings reacted to sudden death. He knew the smell of fresh grief. When Clements walked into the house on 5th Helena Drive, he hit a wall of cold, calculated calm. He did not find a hysterical housekeeper. He did not find frantic doctors. He found 3 people standing in the living room looking completely composed. He asked them what happened. They recited the story of the locked door and the broken window. They spoke in flat, rehearsed tones. Clemens walked into the bedroom. He looked at the body. His police instincts immediately screamed that the scene was entirely fake. Marilyn Monroe was lying face down, her legs perfectly straight, her arms neatly by her side. People who die from a massive overdose of sleeping pills do not die in perfect symmetry. They suffer convulsions. They vomit. They twist in agony. The body is usually found in a contorted position. Furthermore, Clemens noticed the lividity. Lividity is the settling of blood in the lowest parts of the body after the heart stops beating. The lividity on Marilyn's body did not match her position on the bed. The purplish bruising indicated she had died on her back and had been moved hours later. She had been posed. Clemens looked around the room. It was suspiciously tidy. He saw the empty pill bottles on the nightstand. They were arranged neatly. He looked for a water glass. There was no water glass in the room. The plumbing in the master bathroom was turned off due to a remodeling project. It was physically impossible for a woman to swallow handfuls of dry capsules without water. Clemens walked down the hallway. He heard the rhythmic thumping of the washing machine. He found Eunice Murray folding laundry. He asked her why she was doing laundry at 5:00 in the morning while her employer lay dead in the next room. Murray gave a vague, evasive answer. She avoided his eyes. Clemens knew he was standing in the middle of a massive cover-up. He knew a murder had occurred. But Jack Clemens was just a desk sergeant. He was outranked. He was outgunned. Within an hour, the house was swarming with high-ranking detectives, political fixers, and agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Los Angeles Police Department brass took over the scene. Clemens was pushed aside. The investigation was immediately steered away from homicide. The narrative of suicide was pushed down the throats of the responding officers. The fix was in. The body was transported to the Los Angeles County Coroner's office. The autopsy fell to a young deputy medical examiner named Thomas Noguchi. Noguchi was meticulous. He was a man of science. He approached the steel table expecting a routine overdose case. He found a medical impossibility instead. Noguchi examined the external surface of the body. He found no needle marks. He opened the chest cavity. He examined the digestive tract. This was the crucial moment. If Marilyn Monroe had swallowed 40 or 50 Nembutal capsules to kill herself, her stomach would be full of undissolved pill residue. The capsules used yellow dye, TH. The mucosal lining of the stomach would be stained bright yellow. Noguchi opened the stomach. It was completely empty. It was pristine. There was no yellow dye. There was no pill residue. There was no trace of barbiturates in the digestive tract at all. While Noguchi officially concluded the drugs had likely already absorbed into her intestines, underground investigators latched onto this terrifying anomaly. The blood toxicology report showed lethal, off-the-charts levels of Nembutal and chloral hydrate. If the drugs hadn't physically passed through her stomach, theorists argue there were only two other ways those chemicals could enter the bloodstream in such massive quantities: an intravenous injection or an enema. Rumors of abnormal bruising in the lower colon quickly began to circulate within the shadow narrative. For those willing to look past the official police report, the implications of this theory were terrifying. You do not give yourself a forced, violent enema to commit suicide. A victim in that exact scenario is aggressively subdued. In the eyes of underground investigators, this was the absolute, undeniable forensic signature of a calculated murder. He requested further tests. He took tissue samples from the liver, the kidneys, and the stomach lining. He sent them to the chief toxicologist, Raymond Abernathy. He wanted a complete breakdown of the chemical pathways. He wanted proof of how the drugs entered the body. The comprehensive testing was inexplicably aborted. Noguchi went to Abernathy's office a few days later to ask for the detailed breakdown of the chemical pathway. Abernathy coldly informed him that the organ tissues had already been destroyed under the guise of routine disposal. He adamantly stated that because the blood showed lethal levels of sedatives, absolutely no further tests were necessary. Noguchi was stunned. Crucial physical evidence in the most high-profile death investigation in modern history had not just evaporated. It had been legally and deliberately erased inside the county morgue. Noguchi was pressured by his superiors to sign the death certificate. He fought back. He compromised. He refused to write suicide. He wrote probable suicide. It was the only act of defiance he could manage against a system that was closing ranks. Clear's throat. The medical cover-up was only one half of the operation. The political cover-up was far more extensive and far more ruthless. J. Edgar Hoover sat in his office in Washington. The director of the FBI had been tracking Marilyn Monroe for years. He knew about her ties to the Mafia. He knew about her affairs with the president and the attorney general. Hoover despised the Kennedy brothers. He wanted to destroy them. But he also understood the true nature of power. Information is not meant to be released. Information is meant to be hoarded. A released secret ruins a politician. A kept secret controls him. Hoover did not want Marilyn Monroe's death to become a murder scandal that implicated the government. That would cause chaos. He wanted the suicide narrative to hold. He dispatched agents to Los Angeles to sanitize the trail. FBI agents raided the General Telephone Company, confiscating all of Marilyn Monroe's phone records and erasing them from the public record. They raided her home, emptying filing cabinets in a desperate search for the Red Diary. Beyond erasing physical evidence, they intimidated witnesses and visited her friends in the press, making it brutally clear that asking questions about August 4th was a dangerous career move. The Los Angeles Police Department complied perfectly. Chief William Parker was a close ally of the political establishment. He ordered his detectives to shut down all alternate theories. They ignored the testimony of Sergeant Clemens. They ignored the missing stomach contents. They completely ignored the persistent, dangerous whispers regarding Robert Kennedy's true location on the day of her death. While official records and FBI files strictly placed the Attorney General hundreds of miles away in Northern California with his family, deeply buried, unverified testimonies allegedly placed him at a nearby Los Angeles hotel, or even inside the Brentwood house mere hours before she died. Conspiracy theorists argue the Lapt deliberately buried these conflicting witness statements, providing the Kennedy family with a solid, unquestionable alibi. They built a wall of silence around the Attorney General. Sam Giancana watched the aftermath from Chicago. He had achieved his objective. The liability was eliminated. The press conference was canceled. The secrets were buried in the cemetery. But Giancana gained something far more valuable than silence. He gained leverage. The mob boss knew exactly what the government had done. He knew the FBI and the Lapt had scrambled to cover up a murder to protect the Kennedy administration. Giancana now held the ultimate trump card, the President of the United States and the sea. Roos-aiding Attorney General were complicit in the aftermath of a Mafia hit. They could not touch him. If Bobby Kennedy continued his war on organized crime, Giancana could easily leak the true details of the Brentwood house. He could leak the wiretaps from the Calneva Lodge. He could burn the entire political establishment to the ground. The death of Marilyn Monroe created a twisted, unbreakable bond between the criminal underworld and the highest office in the land. They were chained together by a mutual crime. They were co-conspirators in the destruction of a human being. The public consumed the lie eagerly. The newspapers printed the tragic story of a lonely, depressed actress who could not handle the pressure of fame. Editorials lamented the dark side of Hollywood. Fans wept outside the cemetery. They bought the narrative of a fragile blonde who reached for the pill bottle in a moment of despair. It was a neat, tragic, and entirely fictional story. It absolved the men in power. It placed the blame squarely on the victim. Marilyn was stripped of her agency in life, and she was stripped of her truth in death. The media painted her as a victim of her own psychology, entirely ignoring the men who had locked her in rooms, drugged her, wiretapped her, and used her body as collateral. They turned a blind eye to the very system that monetized her existence before calculating the exact cost of her termination. The cover-up was a brutal demonstration of institutional power. It proved that justice is not a blind scale. Justice is a luxury commodity. When a single vulnerable woman threatens the stability of a presidential administration and a billionaire crime syndicate, the truth ceases to matter. The forensic evidence is destroyed. The police reports are altered. The witnesses are silenced. The machine protects the machine. Marilyn Monroe was a casualty of a shadow war. She was caught in a crossfire between men who treated the United States as their personal chessboard. She tried to flip the board. She tried to expose the players. She paid the ultimate price for believing that the truth could protect her from men who wrote their own laws. The operation on August 4th was not a tragedy. It was a systemic execution. It was the swift, merciless silencing of a woman who knew too much, carried out by criminals and sanctioned by the silence of the state. The funeral took place on the 8th of August, 1962. It was not a state event. It was not a Hollywood spectacle. It was a barricaded, deeply private ceremony directed by a man consumed with grief and rage. Joe DiMaggio claimed the body. He bypassed the studio executives. He locked out the press. He barred the politicians, the actors, and the producers from attending. He posted armed guards at the gates of the Westwood Village Memorial Park. He knew exactly who was responsible for the death of the woman he loved. He could not prove the murder in a court of law, but he could deny the murderers the satisfaction of mourning her in public. DiMaggio stood over the bronze casket. He wept for Norma Jean. He'd spent years trying to pull her away from the predators. He had warned her about the men in Washington. He had warned her about the men in Chicago. He recognized the danger long before the trap closed. He watched the wooden box descend into the earth, fully aware that the men who had orchestrated her execution were currently sitting in luxury offices, completely untouched by the law. They had won. They had silenced the threat. They had sanitized the crime scene. They had rewritten history before her body was even cold. The world moved forward. Newspapers printed their tragic eulogies, and the public wept for a broken star. The machinery of American power continued to turn. Yet if the shadow narrative holds true, the men allegedly tied to Marilyn's final days could not outrun their own ghosts. Within a decade, The glittering illusion of Camelot shattered as both John and Robert Kennedy were violently removed from the world stage by assassins' bullets. Sam Giancana, the ruthless underworld architect who believed he held the ultimate leverage, met a similarly brutal fate. He was gunned down in his own basement, and the secrets he supposedly used to blackmail the highest office in the land died with him. The accomplices left behind were forced to live with their ghosts. Figures like Eunice Murray and Dr. Ralph Greenson faded into obscurity, their lives shadowed by shifting stories and ethical failures. Meanwhile, official agencies dismissed the glaring anomalies of August 4th as mere clerical errors. To protect the establishment, the narrative of suicide was essential. It was easier to blame the victim, weaponizing the dumb blonde persona to reduce a highly intelligent, politically observant woman into a tragic caricature. But the darkest theories suggest a different legacy. Marilyn Monroe was not merely a passive casualty of her own psychology. She had the bravery to stand up to a dangerous crime syndicate and a powerful political dynasty, fighting Snort's back with the only weapon she had left, the truth. Today's surviving photographs present a captivating illusion of diamonds and silk, yet looking closely reveals a stark reality. Seeking a family, she found a syndicate. Seeking protection, she found a death sentence. Fame provided absolutely no armor against men who operated above the law. The physical evidence of her death may remain locked in redacted files, but it leaves a stubborn stain on American history. Ultimately, we are left to ask, do you believe the death of Marilyn Monroe was truly the final psychological breaking point of a depressed superstar? Or was it a calculated execution ordered by the Mafia and silently approved by the elite of Washington?